que pertence ao projeto Big Ideas for City. Nela, o nosso convidado Adam van Heerden, da Holanda, vai abordar o potencial dos games em promover engajamento social, defesa de pontos de vista e o exercício da cidadania, além das influências interpessoais durante esse processo. Vale lembrar que, como todas as palestras, você pode mandar perguntas, é só baixar o aplicativo do Big Festival 2018 e lá você manda a pergunta que a gente passa para o convidado depois. Lembrando aqui também que o Wi-Fi é de graça aqui no centro São Paulo. Então, com o tema Engajamento Lúdico, uma ferramenta de fortalecimento da cidadania, eu chamo ao palco Adam van Heerden. Cadê ele? Cadê ele? Aqui. E para moderar o bate-papo, Roberto Spaces Cardoso.
Alô, boa tarde pessoal, bem-vindo ao Big Ideas for Cities em 2018. Essa é uma track que a gente vem desenvolvendo já há algum tempo. Nosso objetivo aqui é discutir como que os jogos e como que as técnicas de jogos e o lúdico podem ajudar no engajamento do cidadão e na transformação das cidades. Né, ano passado, nós tivemos 2 convidados falando a respeito disso. Nesse ano, nós estamos recebendo o Adam. Meu nome é Roberto, eu sou fundador da Cipópolis. Cipópolis é uma empresa que trabalha com análise de dados de mobilidade. E a gente desenvolveu um jogo há um tempo atrás, que chama Buzzbusters, onde a gente usava mecanismos, era antes do Pokémon GO, então a gente usava mecanismos parecidos com o Pokémon GO para engajar as pessoas a fornecerem informações sobre o transporte público, para a gente ter informações mais atualizadas de transporte público. Hoje a gente recebe o Adam. O Adam ele é sul-africano, ele nasceu na África do Sul. Ele fez faculdade de urbanismo, ele se formou em urbanismo e ele chegou à conclusão que aquele urbanismo de papel e de desenhar e de definir como as pessoas vão viver sem a participação das pessoas, aquilo lá estava ultrapassado. E aí ele foi para Amsterdã e hoje ele está fazendo doutorado exatamente nessa área de usar técnicas de jogos e técnicas lúdicas para engajar o cidadão e para discutir a cidade, a transformação da cidade com as pessoas que moram naquela cidade. Então, vou parar por aqui para vocês poderem escutar o que o Adam tem para dizer para a gente hoje, que vai ser bem interessante a palestra deles. Muito obrigado.
Hello everyone, my name is Adam. I'm coming to you today from the Netherlands, where I'm doing a PhD at the University of Eindhoven, and I'm working on playful empowerment with civic media. So what I mean by that, playful empowerment, what we find with games is that they're able to kind of manipulate the opportunity structure that you're allowed to express your agency within. They give you challenges, new resources, tools to use. And this is quite an empowering sort of process. Civic media, I'll go into that in a minute when I describe my co-supervisor and what he's working on, and that's obviously how I ended up where I am. So I want to talk about going from engagement to empowerment through game design. We know that games are motivating and engaging, and they sort of set challenges for us, but this makes them ripe to being co-opted and gamified, right? And it doesn't help anyone to gamify something when you aren't actually changing anything in reality. You're not giving people real resources to change their lives with. So I hope to try and get somewhere towards empowerment in this talk today. So I'm going to go through my PhD basically and how I ended up where I am, which is advocacy in gaming, giving people a platform to express themselves, a platform to store what people say and what they do. And then I'm going to talk about the kinds of technologies in cities that open up new possibilities for hybrid spaces and new interaction opportunities. I'm going to talk about serious games in cities and what games can do for cities and hopefully the other way around as well. And then smart technology and civic media and this kind of debate between efficiency on the one hand and inefficiencies on the other hand, because, you know, sometimes we all feel a bit like robots, waking up in the morning, you do your thing, you go to work, you get your stuff done, you go home and eat, sleep, repeat. So sometimes we don't want to be getting to work the fastest. Sometimes, you know, 2 minutes extra would make all the difference if we got to smell the roses a little bit. So I want to talk about what games can do for cities in terms of modeling them on a scale that is actually tangible and manipulable and kind of means something to us. So it's me and my PhD, and my colleague pointed out to me the day before I left that this hamster here is being electrocuted. So I didn't realize that before, but I think it's quite apt. So this is my hometown. I'm from Durban in South Africa. And like you guys 4 years ago, we had FIFA come and rob us 8 years ago. And they gave us a pavement. It's a beautiful pavement. And why I show you this image is because this is so much a part of who I am. I feel like I wear this image on my sleeve, you know. And this is the power of caring for a place and finding familiarity in that place through the people that connect us to that location. Those steps there I have sat on 100 times, and you know, it makes me warm to see it. And in the background there, you can see our beautiful stadium, which you can see from everywhere in the city. So I want to talk about designing civic media that gives voice to disempowered groups in a planning process. And I want to talk about first how I got there, and I'm going to talk about the mother project that my PhD falls within. Oh, that wasn't supposed to happen. Okay, all right. So the project is called Smart Technologies Empowered Citizens, and we work with a range of partners from architects to urban planners to game designers, product designers, service designers. And I'm mostly focused on the left-hand side of that continuum with the architects and the urban planners, specifically those two, Play the City and Transform City. I previously worked at Play the City before starting my PhD, so that's kind of what's geared me into the trajectory that I'm on. And what they do is they design civic games for bringing citizens into the planning process, getting them gathered around a board table, discussing issues about a specific area. It's issue-oriented. You know, people can share of themselves and express what they want their city to be, really. Oh, man. Sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button here, obviously. All right, so my promoter and supervisor, Dr. Ben Schouten, he's a professor of playful interactions at 2 universities that I'm at, which is the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences and Eindhoven University of Technology, and we move half the week in either university. He's written most on playful empowerment, most recently, and I've already explained what I mean by that. And then Martijn de Waal has written most about the platform society and most recently about hackable cities and how platforms are able to bring people together and unite them around sort of shared interests and complementary assets that they can use to manipulate and change their city in a way that they'd like to see. So this is some of the literature that I'll be referring to today in my talk that comes mostly out of the department that I'm working in and my supervisor's work. And here's the stuff that Martijn de Waal is mostly working on. So first I want to walk you through a process of how I landed up doing this PhD on games, because I haven't always been in games and I've only been in it for the last couple of years. So I studied urban planning at the University of Cape Town, and I did a master's research project on hanging out with waste pickers, informal waste pickers, and I think maybe everyone in the audience is familiar with what waste pickers are, being in Sao Paulo. They're informal recyclers, basically. Often they're homeless, unorganized or informally organized. In Brazil, they're much more organized than in other parts of the world. They've got a long history of organizing waste pickers and campaigning for their rights. So South Africa and Brazil are roughly comparable in the proportion or the number of waste pickers that they have. Brazil has somewhere around 200,000 and 400 to 500,000, that's right. And South Africa has something around 150. Obviously, it's a difficult number to gauge, though. And going on the population sizes, that's about proportionate. So I hung out with these guys that were all homeless. They all go through this activity 5 days a week, like all of us, and except they have a different time scale to the rest of us. They have to wake up before the formal management waste collectors arrive on the scene at 8:30 in the morning. So their day starts while we're sleeping. 4 o'clock in the morning, pitch black, dead of winter, rain, shine, doesn't matter. And I hung out with these guys and I rummaged through dustbins with them, and you can imagine what your hands look and smell like after that. And one of the things that struck me straight away was the amount of glass and sort of things that can cut you in these bins, let alone the disgusting stuff. Nappies, all that kind of thing. And so I thought, of course, these guys need gloves, right? I want gloves. I don't want to be sticking my hand in these bins. And so I bought the whole team a pair of gloves. They didn't want them. They said they need to feel their way through the bin because there's no light. And this is just a very simple example of the kinds of things that we miss as city planners, the kinds of things we think people want, we think that they need. I gave them bags of old clothing, secondhand clothing, a mattress that I didn't need anymore. All of it gone in a day. A pair of shoes that I gave them, stolen the next night. These guys are unable to hold on to anything. They have no safe space. They have the bag of clothes on their back, and that is it. So, obviously, if anyone here has done a master's thesis or a PhD, you know that it's kind of depressing when you end this thing because you realize no one is going to read this thing. So I explored a couple of different ways of getting their story out. I wanted to give these guys a platform to be heard. But obviously it's a very sensitive issue because these guys are invisible and they need to be invisible in order to survive. If they're more visible, then more gridlocks open up in their way from the city, who obviously wants to phase them out, get the machines in. It's unhygienic, they say. But they're not exactly giving these guys taps, showers, any of these things that, human dignity really relies on. And so you can see here on the right-hand side, the one guy washing his hands at the end of a day's work. And what a relief, get that shitty stain off your hands. In the top left there, you see them opening a drain in the middle of a road when the cars are quiet. Obviously, it's 4 a.m., so they are quiet. And they put their only bag of belongings inside a black bag to keep them waterproof, and they put them in the drain and close it and come back at the end of the day. Now, they do this, their friends do this, their friends' friends. It's not uncommon to come back at the end of the day and one of your friends has taken your stuff. So how can you ever get ahead if you can never save anything? I'm sure we could explore new kind of ways of building safes into public spaces, right? These are all possible things, but we don't. In the bottom left here, you see them finding an empty bottle of wine and necking it, but obviously even shares, 5 ways round. And obviously everyone sees these guys as drunkards, drug addicts. They're a problem. They're making noise in the morning while we're trying to sleep. But these guys literally do this to keep warm. And they can identify, at least they believe, and I've witnessed it once or twice to think that they might be right. They can identify which houses are leaving them the empty bottles of wine. This is their form of payment. And so it's just a kind of neat reminder of how social bonds in cities actually keep cities going, and how these guys are a part of this neighborhood where they've worked for 20 years, and people recognize them, they recognize others, and that kind of emotional connection that they have with other people is so strong and so necessary to keep them going. And I would argue necessary to keep the neighborhood going as well, the way it does. But I felt that there still wasn't anyone really seeing these guys' story. And so I played around with some film and hanging out with them and recording them, and I put together a documentary that I want to show you a trailer of today, just to see if maybe that kind of gets more of a feeling of what it feels like to be in their shoes. So these guys are scurrilers, which is reusing rather than recycling.
I've been scurrying from 9 years old. I like to work for myself, that's why scratching in dustbins for peanut for me. That's my life today. Carol. Bolted.
Milking was what? Something.
As when I got this, we was already people. But it's fine.
Coffee shop now and on.
Yeah, no. There's a lot to.
Yeah. But something for you.
So they've obviously got to get there before the rest of the guys get there every day.
I came here to prison in 2005 and I was very shy to scratch in the dustbin. But afterwards, when I saw what came out of the dustbin, when the benefits, that sameness just went away. With the dogs I did very quickly.
Sorry about the audio there, that didn't sound very nice. So I just want to end that off by saying, when I showed these guys this video, I took my iPad to them after weeks of editing and clipping this thing together and, you know, having a bit of fun in my lounge. The day that I showed it to them is something that will stick with me forever. These guys huddled around this iPad, and I swear they felt like Hollywood actors in that moment. They were just, you know, they felt important. And it's not often that these guys get to feel important, like someone is listening to them. Maybe that's all we need sometimes. So going from that, I wanted to explore other avenues and other media for getting people's voices out there, building platforms for sharing people's stories, for making them feel important. And so in this next section, I want to talk about hybrid spaces and the kind of opportunities that smart technologies open up for us in systems, and how games have sort of experimented with that and played with that and can activate public spaces, and how there can be opportunities for connection rather than just connectivity. And so James Gee has spoken a lot about affinity spaces, the ability of games to knit people together into kind of communities that are more fluid than the community that we might imagine that is rooted in space. These are often virtual communities, and internet has connected people together on a much wider sort of scale than previously was the case with gaming. So we've gone from basements to conference halls. People come together and they actually exchange stuff, experiences. And we've gone from the living room floor, playing with Wii sensors and Kinect, to having sensors and actuators on virtually every public space in the city. So we've gone from the living room floor to the urban playground, where we can explore new opportunities for obstacles in games, new kinds of challenges to circumvent, new players to play with. And it also brings out this opportunity for playing in space that was previously confined to a magic circle. And so I just want to take you through a series of examples now. There's going to be a lot of examples in this presentation, so I hope you can enjoy that. This is taken from Playable City, and it's just an example of how technology can be used to bring through interactions across physical divides. So this game, Knock Knock, erects a virtual door in a city where you can go and knock on it, and there's a door in another city somewhere around the world where if someone opens, you can have a conversation with them and just, spark up an interaction, see what they're feeling like, what's the weather like in your city, etc. I must just clarify quickly, there's Playable City in Bristol, and there's Play the City in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, where I previously worked. I'll be using examples from both of these. So this is something that I've been working on for the last couple of years while I've been in the Netherlands, working at Play the City and now on my PhD. I've been building a database of city-based games, which are mostly serious games, and the ones that aren't have serious game-like qualities to them, educational aspects. And I mean, it's quite an extensive database, and what we've done is we've come up with themes and ways of categorizing these games, different things that they can do, the kinds of mechanics that they use, and we've tried to identify some patterns so that we know how to design games for a particular experience. If anyone's a game designer here, you know how difficult that can be. You have to be very concise and sort of refined in your core mechanics in the game to get that experience across. And so here are a couple of examples I've taken from that platform. The first one is the Cityscope platform developed by MIT, and this is running a game called Finding Places in Hamburg. And I think it's just a nice example of how physical and digital can be brought together to make data more tangible and more meaningful to players, that they can actually reconfigure their city and see what kinds of changes that takes place based on algorithmic simulations. So in this one, they were trying to find places, they were trying to basically get around NIMBYism, which is not in my backyard. No one wants a refugee springing up, a refugee apartment next to them because their property value goes down, etc., etc. And so this was trying to bring citizens into the conversation where they could propose areas in their city that would be suitable locations to house refugees. The outcomes of the game are perhaps a little disappointing, and only 3 locations ended up going through, but citizens were involved in that discussion. They had a say. Block by block on the bottom is an example of how digital and physical come together in digital design with physical implications and implementation. So they use the Minecraft platform to try to bring younger planners, future planners, into the planning process. Where you get it's predominantly in third world countries or third world cities where this is run. 2-day workshops where they get kids up to speed on the Minecraft platform, they get them to redesign physical areas in their city, and they have the potential to be funded and built. This is a game designed by a colleague of mine, Genevieve Court, in the Netherlands, and they were exploring what people would think that 2031 submerged underwater would be like in Amsterdam. What kinds of emotions would this provoke in players? It's also an example of taking play and planning into physical space. And this is something that planners often struggle with, because you go into the physical space, you see what it's like, you go back to your computer and you design it. You don't have the opportunity to actually be in that space, designing, thinking, coming up with ideas. So they took players, they had a mobile application, which was an instant messaging type game that you received messages and you got asked questions, things to look for in your environment. Can you see the guy wearing the red hat? And you're scouting around and you're starting to notice things in your environment that you never saw before. So where I take most of my inspiration from is the Games for Change website and the Games for Cities website that I've been building up. And the Games for Cities website really is a kind of amalgamation of both of these, because cities are not just about the physical infrastructure, they're about people, first and foremost, right? And so Paul Michaelides and Eric Gordon, in their book Civic Media, they define play as an activity in which the means are more valuable than the ends. It is done first and foremost for its own sake. And this is obviously something that serious games often struggle with, right? In my experience at least, people that usually attend these sessions they're on the clock and they're invited to play. So this is work. So Clark App, the guy that coined serious games, says that games may be played seriously or casually. We are concerned with serious games in the sense that these games have an explicit and carefully thought out educational purpose and are not intended to be played primarily for amusement. This does not mean, though, that serious games are not or should not be entertaining. I don't really know, this is something that I'm still working towards and trying to make these games more fun, more entertaining, but something that Eric Gordon said at the first Games for Cities conference last year in Rotterdam was that fun is perhaps more of a reward from applying yourself at something and squeezing out the juice of what that has to offer. So here are some examples from the Games for Change website. Games that allow us and enable us to kind of step into the shoes of another person and go through what they're experiencing. So what does it feel like to be autistic or depressed, blind, go through a sex change? These are things that none of us here can probably imagine, and things that planners have to imagine for themselves in order to design for these. And so maybe games can help to give us that experience of empathy and kind of feeling what that's like. So this example, Papers, Please, which a lot of people are probably familiar with here, is a great example of putting someone in another person's shoes. So you're a border police control officer and you're charged with letting migrants in or out, stamping their passports or rejecting them. And you're faced with decisions like, okay, so a family of a couple with 2 kids, you've let the wife and 2 kids in, but the father, he's only got his ID document and not his passports. Do you let him in or do you separate the family? And you know that if you let him in, your salary could go down that month. And it's easy for us maybe, or easier, to step into the shoes of the migrant and feel that sense of injustice that he must feel. But we also got to step into the shoes of the border police control officer who needs to put food on the table. He doesn't want to make this decision, but he has to. So there are some things that games do that kind of help us to put us in the shoes of someone else. So there's this role play element, and then there's this role switching element, which I think is particularly valuable for civic empowerment, because they allow us to see something from our own perspective or from someone else's perspective, and then switch and see how we would see an issue differently. In this game, players, they're cast into a 3D environment behind computer screens. Everyone's playing around the same table and interacting with one another in that same virtual space. And they choose one of 15 characters, and they have to then act out the powers, the ambitions of that player. Then they play it from their own perspective, putting their own values into it and seeing how they would make those decisions. And perhaps the order in which this is done, someone else's and then your own, kind of builds this the sense of this balance between collective and individual interests that is always so difficult to kind of get right in a planning process. We can all see things from ourselves, from our own perspectives, very easily. Something else that games are able to do is this wisdom of the crowd. They're able to kind of get the ideas of a large number of players, motivate them on a topic, make that sort of data into very simple mechanics that can be followed through. This game has some amazing outcomes. I mean, it's really revolutionary. In 10 days of releasing this game, the players were able to crowdsource the solutions to identifying the protein folding pattern for identifying the HIV virus, a problem that scientists had been stumped by for 15 years. Something else with data, a lot of the stuff is about data, the way that games are able to kind of thread people into the debate. And often with planning, I mean, what planning has struggled with for 50 years or 100 years is we've got the physical data, but the social data is always so difficult to overlay on top of that. And so this is not really an example of how that thick data comes to be, but it is an example of how physical data can be used to promote social interaction and community building. So players, your smartphone connects up to your smart electricity or gas meter in your house, which you have to play the game. So of course, I went and paid a lot of money to install one. It's still only on Android though, so that sucks. And you're charged with saving electricity in your house in different ways. You have to experiment because who knows how much energy their shower takes in the morning, right? So you tweak things and you change and you see changes. And there are also community-wide challenges where you have to come together in your neighborhood and partner with people and get to know people and how they're saving energy to try and help you. Games are able to thread a constructive debate together around civic issues. It's always issue-oriented for these civic games that I talk about and that I'm working on in my PhD. And so there's a kind of an ability to focus attention on one single thing and one single place and get people imagining a new environment for that place. And I think that's quite powerful when you bring so many different people into a space. It's very easy to kind of derail the discussion and get sidetracked. So to focus on a central artifact, speak through those players, through those pieces that are now you on the table. They also enable multiple stakeholders to come together. So there's citizens on the one hand getting pulled into the discussion, and then there's all the professionals that go together for an urban development process. Engineers, architects, planners, environmentalists, anthropologists, you name it, there's hundreds. And so what this game does is it's another example of situating the design activity in the physical space that we're talking about. Go into that park, get a face-to-face interaction going and discuss what we want for this place. What you come out with is this kind of abstract word tree type thing that suggests focuses, importance, where things should be. So Eric Gordon spoke about meaningful inefficiencies at the first Games for Cities conference. And what he means by that is this ability to kind of focus on process and integrating into larger systems and placing emphasis on getting people into the debate. It's not all about making things efficient and fast. So he says that it's a kind of adversarial design, which paves the way for dissensus, contestational relations and experiences. And there's an emphasis on care and relation within civic systems. And in planning, these relationships are so important, My thesis was all about relational planning. What do people feel about this process? How do we kind of bring that social data into the mix? And so here's an interview that I had with Eric at that first conference where he talks a bit about this. Hope the volume's a bit better on this one.
My name is Eric Gordon, and I'm a professor of civic media at Emerson College, and I direct a lab there called the Engagement Lab. And the work that I do is focused on using games and play to help people reimagine the way that they can participate in civic life. If we're talking about cities as organizations, then games can be really instructive for organizations to think differently about the work that they do. So I think a lot about a context of game design thinking, where you can use games as a way of reframing problems. And sometimes that manifests itself in a game that people will actually play. Sometimes it really is just a design thinking process where people, by the end of that process, understand the problem in a different way. On one hand, games can help cities because they can help organizations. On the other hand, games can help cities when we start thinking about the way that people occupy space differently, when we create meaningful constraints. What's interesting about a game is that you can use the necessary constraints that you have to develop within games to make apparent what those constraints are to people, and then give them the power to explore and create within them. So I think that there's a huge amount of opportunity for us to deploy games within physical spaces, and I point specifically to augmented reality opportunities where we can really start reframing how people occupy physical space by making those constraints that they experience on an everyday basis apparent to them and giving them opportunities to play within them. Can we rely on players to help plan cities? Then yes. Can we rely on games to do it? I would say no. I don't like a future with autonomous games that can do anything for us. I think that we always need to have input into the games we play and how we play them. What happens in games can be really powerful because the stakes are lower than the stakes are in everyday life. When I play a game, I get to experience a reality where failure is an option, where I get to play with ideas, play with identities. And that's incredibly important. It's incredibly important to give people the opportunity to do that so that they can understand what they think, where they're coming from, what other people think, and open up their minds to things. The challenge is, how do you go from the magic circle of a game to the reality of planning a city? And it's never going to be a one-to-one, nor what I want it to be, because I think the play space needs to be nurtured and protected, and that we need to use that then to move into the work of planning. So the future that I would like to see is an openness to ideation and creativity that emerges from play. Play is not good to distract people with, but it's actually good to empower them.
Sorry. The smart cities are rather rational opposition, right? A rational proposition where technological efficiency is the primary indicator of success. And meaningful inefficiencies insert play and encounter, caring for, as necessary components in designing the systems of our future cities. And an example of this, and the kind of social data and effective mapping, crowdsourcing this data from citizens, and this focus on inefficiencies and kind of just taking it in a bit more, is a project that they're working on at the Bell Computer Labs in Cambridge called Good City Life, where they work on happy maps, chatty maps, and smelly maps. And this one here is an example of smelly maps, but what I want to talk about is happy maps, where what they noticed was that people are much more likely to upload photos to social media of things that make them happy, right? Things that they like, buildings that they like, roses on street corners. And they collated this across the city so that you could come up with a kind of a routing algorithm that would show you the path, the most efficient path through the city that would also make you happy, where you could stop to smell the roses. what he also says in that interview there is that it's never going to be a one-to-one kind of translation. You need to do some interpretation for what players are actually saying when they do the things they do in the game. When players in Kailicha that are reimagining their informal settlement and how it could be upgraded, when they say that they need a traders cooperative for bargaining for their rights, what they're really saying is that rental price here is 900 Rand a month and rental price there is 300 a month. And we understand that the city wants us to travel 10 kilometers to rent a shop here and sell to people that we don't know because they have vacant shops there. But we want to work here. And we need to hear them for what they're saying. They also propose things like deconstructed shopping malls, which is obviously much closer to a kind of an informal market space than a shopping mall. And planners have this obsession with building shopping malls over and over. And so there's a kind of a resistance to this that comes through in the game, but you really need to look to see these things. I am going to skip through that one because of the time, but that's an example of the Bristol Data Dome, which is just this amazing project that is mapping kinds of social media data that they're finding, which is really showing how diverse our cities are and how interesting they are. This is a model that we developed in the office for a paper that we've recently written, which will be presented at a conference in Turin in a month's time. And it plays on the Plex model, which is playful experiences, how to design for playful experiences. And it tries to put a civic twist on this. What is important for games that are focused on city making? The three outer rings are motivate, participate, advocate. There's nothing too revolutionary there. And what I'm most interested on is the advocate side of things. And so these games have this ability to kind of motivate people by giving them an enlarged sense of agency. You know, you're now the city planner and you need to behave like a city planner. You're given new tools to express those needs and those ambitions. And there's also this impact aspect where, like in the game of Fold It, you get this sense of reward that you are contributing towards science. You know, you were part of one of the people that contributed that solution to identifying the HIV/AIDS pattern. We think that it's very important that these games have face-to-face interaction with them, even if there's technology overlaid with that, because that brings about a kind of an empathy and a relatedness for the other, that you can imagine how things might be different from another perspective. And advocating, giving people a platform to express themselves, like my waste pickers on the movie. I imagine games that can give people a platform to share their desires and also a platform that can kind of capture these desires and make them usable to planners afterwards. So I think games have this ability to kind of model complexity into much more simplified elements and mechanics on a single tabletop rather than the whole city. And they allow us to kind of reconfigure these systems and get to know how we can affect them in real life and how they affect us. So this is an example that a game that Play the City designed, which was looking at circular business models and how to kind of rope businesses into a circular mindset of thinking. So they did some research in a particular area in Amsterdam, the inputs and outputs into businesses, how many kilograms of this and kilograms of that, how much profit they made, how much waste. And they tried to loop these together and then gather them around a table and made this information transparent to them so that people could see the connections for themselves. For example, the coffee roaster links up with the urban farmer, who links up with the logistics company, and all of a sudden the coffee waste is being used as fertilizer and everybody's saving money. When I participate in these 48-hour design sprints or co-design sessions or game jams or whatever you want to call them, I often come out of them feeling quite guilty at how much I've gained out of the process and how much the eventual player of that game that we designed, that very refined concept, will get out of it. And so a colleague of mine at University of Milan in Italy, she once said to me that she had this infographic with these 3 circles inside one another. And the outer circle says, this is what game designers hope to get into a game. The one inside that, about half the size, says, this is what they actually get in, for whatever reasons, resources, skills. And the little circle in the middle is, this is what players get out of it. So what we do in this project is we're trying to get citizens involved into the co-design process so that they can reap the benefits of the full process like we do. And we use design games to do this because we think that they have the qualities of the games that I've been talking about in a much more refined sense. They kind of focus you on a central task. They bring multidisciplinary groups to focus on a single thing. There's a way of kind of collating the input there. And so my PhD vision is to design games that are open systems, can take in new knowledge as players bring that knowledge into the session, and kind of promote a sense of connection rather than connectivity. And so here's one such game that I'm currently working on and trying to improve, where they highlight the physical assets and resources in the city for how to climb the social ladder for people who feel like not at home in an area. Maybe they're refugees, maybe they've lived there for 20 years and they just don't feel connected to it. So highlight the resources, gather people around a table, get them campaigning for their area like they're the mayor, attracting human resources because they've got the swimming pool that can do, I don't know, provide the lessons that the people need, etc. And you've got to get quite creative in how you market your area to others. And then you're obviously playing yourself as well, where you are one of the human resources being attracted. And so what I imagine is a game like this that highlights not only the physical resources in the area, but also the social resources. The guy who's willing to walk with the old lady in the park in the afternoon, etc. And so a few things that I've sort of come to while putting this presentation together is some things that games can do for empowerment and that city planning struggles with ordinarily. So they create affinity spaces, and they do this by organizing collaborative discussion in the situ and sort of face-to-face interaction. They get this empathy and relatedness through that face-to-face interaction and through role switching. They're open systems that can utilize the wisdom of the crowd. They use hard and soft data to thicken things up and make them meaningful. They translate and relay these outcomes. And they work with symbolic time, something that planners struggle with. You're often constrained by your immediate sort of context and what you're allowed to do with the technology and the institutional constraints. And so games break us out of that. And so that dragged on for a little bit longer than I hoped, so I'm sorry about that. But I hope to have taken you on a short journey with me on how to go from engagement to empowerment and how this can be useful to cities. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Adam, for your talk. It was very interesting. The work you do with the trash pickers is amazing. It's nice to see how many concepts and how many things we think are true are actually not true, and it's totally counterintuitive if you see from afar. But once you experiment their lives, it makes completely sense. So that shows the role of empathy and how putting ourselves on the shoes of another person makes us think better how that person or how that group of people they organize and they think and what they need and what are their needs and their. It's fun because trash pickers are very important for the city. Here in São Paulo, there's a group of people that even are trying to allow trash pickers on the cycle lanes to facilitate their jobs because they're so important for the city waste management and recycling and stuff like that. So, and that brings us to the complexity of the city. It's fun to realize how complex is the city, how the city is a complex organism, and to design a city it's very hard because every decision has lots of side effects. And I think one of the roles of games on that context is to make it clear to people which are those side effects, and to mediate this conversation, and to help people understand better which decisions are leading to which results, and also to allow people to have empathy and to put themselves on the place of the others by role-playing and understand the effects of the decisions on other people that are not themselves. So thank you very much for all the cases, the scenarios. You mentioned Papers, Please. Papers, Please is very interesting right now in this context because of what's happening in the US and the policy of separating kids from their mothers. And maybe if people have played more Papers, Please, there'll be more empathy for what's going on. And it's much easier to understand once you put yourselves on the role of an immigrant or of a refugee, and on the people responsible for taking those decisions. So thank you very much. Before we start with the questions, I would like to ask one question, then I will open for questions of the audience. I would just like to know if you have any ideas on how to scale up those approaches. For cities. You've been to São Paulo for one day already. You've seen the size of the city, and how can we engage, 12 million people, or even a little neighborhood? How can you use those techniques to engage large amounts of people, larger crowds on the city change? Do you have any ideas? Do you have any ways or
Yeah, I mean, this is something I spend a lot of time thinking about, but I don't really know what the answers are. That example that I used of submerged, to imagine Amsterdam in 2031 underwater after a major sort of environmental hazard, that was an attempt to kind of access more people through the process. And I think they did achieve that. I don't know to what extent, but I think there's definitely some value in these kind of smaller games that people can play just on an ad hoc basis, rather than investing hours of their time playing a game of FIFA against their mates.
Thank you.
Queria pedir desculpa, mas infelizmente nosso tempo acabou. Our time's up. Mas o Adam está aqui, vocês podem conversar com ele ao longo do Big, aqui nos outros dias, ou logo depois aqui. Queria agradecer a presença de todos. Obrigado pela palestra, thanks very much. E a gente continua as palestras daqui a pouco. Obrigado, gente.